Hi guys, Jay here, and this is my team thoughts for the Imola Grand Prix. Let's get into it. So first of all, a quick recap from Miami. I had a good weekend really, to be fair. Team 1, I did play Limitless. Funny story, I was at my sister's this past weekend, and on Saturday morning I had to lock in my team early because we were taking her daughters out for the day. So I actually went with Leclerc and Ferrari. Thankfully, we got back just in time to see Leclerc's crash in the warm-up lap. So it was a quick scramble, taking out Leclerc and Ferrari and trading in for Antonelli and Mercedes. I tried to pull out the Limitless chip completely, but the game wouldn't let me. That said, I can't complain. I've got 393 points. The downside, though, unfortunately, is that in the background, we only got 0.9 in budget. For Team 2, I was setting up for Limitless in Imola, so I went with Alonso and Lawson. Unfortunately, Lawson crashed into Alonso during the sprint, and then Doohan went into Lawson in the Grand Prix. So I got hit heavy by DNFs, plus I had Bearman, so I won't be able to play Limitless in Imola with this team. I'm going to have to restructure, possibly wildcard. So yeah, bit of a rebuild job with Team 2, unfortunately. And then finally with Team 3, it was probably the best performing team, I would say, out of the three. Got 264 points and a 1.6 increase in budget. Downside here is that Bearman had the DNF, and we now need to look to points. So probably going to be making 2 transfers with this team. So early thoughts. First of all, like I say, I scored 393 points with my Limitless team. However, to be fair, the no negative was also very, very powerful this past weekend. We've got a team here from the Global League that scored 325 points. So if you played no negative, like, well done, because that, really worked out for you. Unfortunately, a lot of teams' budgets would have got hit, but at least this gives some teams a bit of breathing space. Talking of the DNFs, as we know, they have a massive impact, especially on our budget builders this season. And so a lot of teams are having to rethink their strategies. So like I said, for my team 2, for example, I'm setting up for Limitless in Imola. That's not going to happen now. So budget is now going to be hard to come by as well, because we now need to start thinking about points. So if you still have your Limitless chip, I would definitely be thinking Imola or Monaco, maybe Spain, maybe. But that being said, you also want a good budget building team in the background, and that's what's been the problem a few times for people this season, is you try and build a race before with a budget team, only to then get hit with a DNF, and so it's back to square one. So yeah, budget building has been difficult this year for a lot of teams. Talking of budget builders and looking at Oliver Bearman, because obviously he got hit by the DNF, he's now at 8.7 million, but he needs 23 points for a 0.2 and 31 points for a 0.6. So he's the one budget builder that you may now want to be looking to offload, just because he's going to be too expensive for what you need. Otherwise, there's been some changes with the budget builders. Stroll has shot up after scoring 25 points in Miami. He only needs 1 point for a 0.2 and 9 points for a 0.6. Just go back to my notes. So Stroll's average this season at the moment is 11.3 on F1 Fantasy Tools /statistics. Thankfully, he's had no DNFs so far this season. But again, we are going to be on a low overtaking track, and he has scored 2 points in Japan, but only 1 in Saudi Arabia. So we're probably looking at a 0.2 increase for Stroll, unless he works some magic or there's some DNFs around him. So I'd say 0.2 for Stroll, but he is the most likely to gain budget because he only needs a point or 9 points. Then got Hulkenberg, who now comes into the picture. He needs 5 points for a 0.2 and 10 points for a 0.6 rise. But he only comes in at an average of 2.5 points a race. So, being in that slow Sauber, 5 points, it's not a lot, but it could still be a stretch. 10 points, highly unlikely. Hadjar, I don't have any issues with Hadjar at the moment. He should bounce back in Imola. He needs 7 points for a 0.2, 12 points for a 0.6. I would probably say, again, 0.2 is what we're probably looking at for Hadjar. We've then got Alexander Albon. He is one of the more expensive tier Bs, but he is proving his worth. Like I say, I've got him in my team free, and he has been consistent, scoring 10 or more points every weekend so far, except for in Japan where he scored 8. He only needs 6 points for a 0.2, but does need 18 points for a 0.6. So again, I'd say a 0.2 is more likely in terms of budget gains. Finally, we've got Esteban Ocon, Mr. Moneybags, as I've been calling him lately. He needs 13 points for a 0.2 and 21 for a 0.6 rise. However, his highest score on a low overtaking track was 8 in Australia, so there is a good chance he will lose budget. That said, he has been outperforming the HAAS since the start of the season, so it's going to be a case of whether you think he'll be able to pick up those 13 points for that 0.2. Highly unlikely for the 0.6 rise 21 points, given it's a slow overtaking track. In terms of the floor, as we know, Bortoleto is at the price floor, 4.5 million, so he can't go down. We now have Jack Doohan on the price floor at 0.4, so he can't decrease in price. However, once again, there is a lot of news going around that he could be replaced by Franco Colapinto for Imola. And so if you have Jack Doohan in your team and he does get replaced by Colapinto, then you will have to make a transfer. You'll be forced into that transfer. So, Team 1, it's going to be 2 transfers, I think. We'll be saying goodbye to HAAS and Leclerc, because that's the only way I'll be able to bring in Mercedes. And then I need to make a choice. I could go for Lance Stroll, which is the more likely option, or I could go for Nico Hülkenberg. But I would say Lance Stroll is probably the more obvious choice, just because he has, he only needs that 1 point or 9 points for the price rise. The downside is I will still have Behrman, who will lose in budget, but I'm not also opposed to having Behrman in my team just for some extra points anyway. I don't want to take another 10-point hit for an extra transfer, because I've already taken 3 extra transfers this season, so I've already lost out 30 points. So I would say at the moment, this is the team I would be looking at, because we have now got to think about points, especially after using Limitless, and I've already used my wild card as well. So for Team 2, however, I'm probably going to be playing my wild card, if I'm honest, because I've got Lawson, Alonso and Behrman, who have all been hit with the DNFs, and they're not going to be going up in budget. So be saying goodbye to them, and we'll also be saying goodbye to HAAS again for points wise. So again, it'd be Mercedes, and then I'd probably be bringing in Lance Stroll, Nico Hülkenberg, and Gabriel Bortoleto, because he's hit that price floor. Unfortunately, I can't afford Albon, because I don't have enough budget. So yeah, we're probably looking at a double Sauber drivers wise for Team 2. I had to play my wild card. Now, if this team works out in Imola, then I would consider playing Limitless in Monaco, because I still have my Limitless chip for this team. For Team 3, I've got options. I could just make 1 transfer and say goodbye to Behrman, bring in Lance Stroll, and try and go for a full-on budget build. This would also only be 1 transfer, so going into Monaco, I would have that choice, play Limitless or make 3 transfers. The downside though is, in keeping HAAS, I'd be losing out on points. So my mind right now is either I do this, just 1 transfer, or I make... No, I can't even do that. So I'd have, or I could go Williams actually. Or I could go Williams. So I'd probably maybe stick with HAAS. And then again, just get an extra bit of budget and then maybe Limitless in Monaco. But that's something I'm going to have to think about. I could also go Bortoletto, and then that still won't give me enough for Mercedes, unfortunately. So either Williams or HAAS. Probably the Stroll route, I think. So yeah, maybe that and get the extra budget. Also, I forgot to say, the benefit with this team is I've actually still got all my chips available. So that's something that will hopefully go in my favour. So talking of the chips, I'm using my Team 3 here because they've still got all their chips available. A lot of teams are going to be thinking about Limitless, for Imola. Especially if they didn't play it in Miami. So expect to see a lot of teams playing Limitless in Imola. If you have a good budget building team in the background, then sure, go for it. But otherwise, I would maybe hold off. It's a bit difficult. You've got to weigh up. Where do you think you'll get more points from Limitless, Imola or Monaco, or after Monaco? But also, ideally, you want your budget builders in the background, building that budget the week that you do play Limitless. So you have to balance that out. Wildcards, if like my Team 2, for example, where you had a lot of DNFs, wildcard is something to think about, and to start a rebuild. Final Fix, I wouldn't consider, and I'm going to get to why I'm bringing up Final Fix in just a sec. Only because ideally Final Fix you want to save for a high overtaking track where a top tier asset is lower down the grid at the start, because in that way, think of Max Verstappen in Brazil last year when he started P17 and finished in first, winning the race, that kind of thing. And then no negative, and the reason I bring up the no negative is because at the time of this recording, so it's Tuesday today, Tuesday the 6th of May, and at the moment the race should be dry, but qualifying could be wet. So yeah, we may have more rain, which is why no negative could end up being powerful, because if that rain moves into Sunday, then as we saw in Miami, no negative can be a powerful chip. Otherwise, autopilot, extra DRS, as I keep saying, not until later in the year. So in terms of times for Imola, here in the UK, we've got free practice 1 and 2 on Friday at 12:30 and 4 o'clock. Then on Saturday, we've got practice 3 at 11:30 and qualifying at 3 o'clock. And then on Sunday, race day, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So an afternoon race for us here in the UK. And as we've just hit on a little while ago regarding the weather, as things stand, it should be dry for the race, but wet for qualifying. So something to bear in mind. So last season's top 10 were Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso and Yuki Tsunoda. So for GridRivals, I'll just keep it short. I actually gained budget this time around, gained 4 million. Everyone is still locked in for Imola. I think I've got 2 or 3 that I'll need to change after that. But otherwise, no changes for me for Imola in GridRivals. And yeah, I gained about 10,000 places in the global ranking as well after a dreadful Saudi Arabia. Hey guys, so a bit of extra recording today, some post-recording, because since recording this video on Tuesday, there's been a lot of breaking news across Tuesday and Wednesday. First of all, as you would have already seen earlier in the video, that it is now confirmed that Franco Colapinto will be replacing Jack Doohan for the next 5 rounds, as Alpine opt to rotate the seat. Now, in the F1 fantasy game, at the moment, Colapinto is not there, but if we just look at Jack Doohan for a second, currently on the floor at 4.5, estimated price for Colapinto is probably between 5 and 6 million, I'd say. That being said, I'd be reluctant to go. I wouldn't be reluctant to go with Colapinto straight away, but my concern is the whole 5 races thing, because we have to remember, if you have an inactive driver in your team, you need to transfer them out or you'll incur a points penalty. Can use Final Fix for a substituted driver, but that'll only count for once because you only used Final Fix once. But my concern with this, and I did a post on YouTube yesterday, so what I said was, what does this mean for F1 Fantasy? The current rules are that you must transfer out any inactive drivers or receive a points penalty. This would mean that one of your 2 or 3 transfers would need to be used for Imola, i.e. transferring out Jack Doohan because he'll be inactive, and Great Britain, because by Great Britain, Colapinto at the moment would be inactive. The next question is, will the rotation be every 5 rounds? Imola, Great Britain, Azerbaijan, Las Vegas, or as and when? Which would leave F1 fantasy managers forced into a transfer at unexpected times, especially if you have planned ahead and saved the transfer. Also, could this have an effect either positively or negatively on team budget? So what I'm basically saying here is, for those of us that try and plan ahead, i.e. there's a lot of engaged F1 fantasy managers that will try and save a transfer deliberately in a round or 2. But then if a team like Alpine decides, you know what, this weekend we're going to throw Paul Aaron into the car, great. Well, that plan of saving that extra transfer is now out the window, because now I've got to remove Doohan, or I've got to remove Colapinto if they're in your team. So this makes me kind of sketchy on the Alpine assets. That being said, though, from a budget perspective, I do wonder if we could ride their budget gain waves. So, for example, Colapinto, as we know, as things stand, will be in the team for the next 5 races. So, do we bring in Colapinto, riding for those 5 races, in the hope that he builds budget, and then we know that, okay, come the British Grand Prix, he's gone. So then we swap him out and bring in the next Alpine driver, and then, ride on their budget gains, if any. And then sticking with Alpine, on Tuesday, team principal Ollie Oakes resigned after 10 months. Given that they finished in P6 last season, granted they had some luck in Brazil, but for a team principal to leave that quickly, especially when there's driver rotations, is concerning. But also, I was watching P1 with Matt and Tommy this morning, and then some of the Sky Sports podcasts, and I believe they both said there has been 7 team principals since 2020 in Alpine. It's becoming a bit like a football team. Something's definitely wrong at Alpine at the moment. If I remember correctly, watching Sky Sports, I think it was this morning, I think it was Karun Chanlok said that, I can't remember how many, but a few of the engineers and that are leaving for Cadillac, I think. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, lots of changes at Alpine, and that's where, from an F1 fantasy perspective, I'm a little bit edgy to pick the Alpine assets. And finally, Carlos Sainz Sr., so Carlos Sainz father, who is an ex-driver himself in rally and does the Dakar, has emerged as a candidate to become FIA president ahead of the December 2025 election. I'll put a link in the description. I had a little look yesterday, but from what I understand, a lot of people, a lot of teams are, backing Carlos Sainz Sr. A lot of people not happy with Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the current FIA president, for reasons that are quite justified, to be honest. Carlos Sainz Jr. Had to pay like 15,000 euros, I think it was, for being 5 seconds late to a national anthem after having a stomach issue a few races ago. But Carlos Sainz Sr. potentially will be running for the FIA presidency. So that's it from me, guys. I hope your teams did well in Miami. Good luck for Imola. I will try and have this ready for Thursday evening. I'll probably start editing tomorrow. And then, yeah, if I don't speak to you next week, I'll speak to you in 2 weeks when we start preparing for Monaco. All the best.